Okay, everybody. Let's get ready to paint. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my studio. My name's Michael Markowsky, and today we're going to be recreating another painting by another one of my favorite artists. Today we are going to be looking at the art of Mark Rothko, and this painting has been popping up in my social media feeds and YouTube feeds quite frequently over the past few weeks because of the war in Ukraine, and because I think a lot of people see that there's very similar colors that we see in the Ukrainian flag. The only difference is that the Ukrainian flag, the blue is on the top and the yellow is on the bottom. So let's say, I don't know if I can, oh yeah, it will let me rotate it. So the Ukrainian flag looks a lot more like that than the original painting, which looks like this. Now, I'm 100% confident that Mark Rothko did not make this painting in honor of Ukraine, because he died in 1970, long before Ukraine achieved its independence in 1991 with the fall of communism and the Soviet Union. Although we'll talk a little bit briefly about the history of the Ukrainian flag, because it actually goes back as early as 1848 and very briefly in 1918-19 at the beginning of the Russian Revolution. Okay, so we're going to create this painting, and I'm going to try a few different things, because we're going to talk about why this painting and this whole style of Mark Rothko is of interest, and how he got to paint, like how he arrived at this style to begin with. And so one of the fun things I'm going to try doing is using an egg, mixing it into my paint. So we're going to have a little bit of fun trying a few different things, because Mark Rothko sometimes used eggs to mix into his oil paint. So we're using acrylic study, not oil. So we're basically doing a whole bunch of different things that are totally unique to acrylic paint. Okay, so let's just kind of quickly cover the bases of how we're going to progress through today's episode. We're going to begin with getting an image on the canvas. We'll talk about that because usually I provide a template. Today I'm not going to use the template, although there is one. I'll show you where that is. And then we're going to start getting the canvas ready. And we're going to do something a little bit different than the normal process we take here, so some of this might change here. While one of those coats of paint is drying, we'll talk about Mark Rothko, his biography, and how he arrived at these paintings. And I would say probably in a couple of hours, we should be wrapping up. Okay, so if you're watching this episode long after it aired, you will have plenty of opportunity to just jump right to the end and see how the two paintings that I make turned out. So, again, here's the original, and here is the outline that I did for today's painting. So if you want to try to recreate it as closely as possible, you can... Oh, there's the flag of Ukraine. You can click in the description below, and there's a Dropbox link. And in the Dropbox link, you're going to see all of these folders. All of our easiest paintings are at the very, very top of the folder. And then the more complicated paintings are below that. And I consider today's painting not necessarily very complicated, but because we're using materials and approaches that are very experimental, it might be a little bit different and out of the range of most beginner painters. So you're certainly welcome to attempt it. I mean, little kids could do what we're doing today and have a lot of fun. Maybe not recreate what Mark Rothko did, although some people will say, my kid could do that. But you have, there's two versions of the outline, a JPEG and a PDF, and the original. I'll also just highly encourage you, if you're watching for the first time, to join our Facebook group. There's a link in the description below for that as well, and upload your version of today's painting or anything else you're doing. Every month or so, sometimes shorter, a little bit longer, I go through the Facebook group, cull all the images and organize them together and give people feedback. And it's all free. You don't have to pay a penny for it if you don't want to, but it's an option for you if you want to get better and better and have a little bit of feedback from myself. I'm a professional artist and teacher. So speaking of which, I thought I would just also mention, if you want to support the channel, a couple of ways that you can do that is by liking, hit the notification bell, and subscribe to the channel. And again, take a photograph of your work, upload it to your Instagram, put it on Twitter, and you can also link back to the channel here, and that just brings more and more people and helps build and helps me keep this whole ship afloat. And if you want to leave a small donation, here's another way to do that. So I should also just mention, since we are talking about, we will kind of talk a little bit about Ukraine throughout today's episode because of the obvious connection with the colors and how a lot of people see that connection. There isn't an innate one, not on Mark Rothko's part, but how people have made that connection. If you want to support Ukraine and the conflict and helping people, for instance here, the Refugee Council from the UN, people escape the bombardment, here's a great place to donate. You could also, with the Canadian Ukraine Foundation or the Canada Ukraine Foundation, you can donate money to help support, give shelter for refugees that are coming to Canada. UNICEF helps children who are caught in the crossfire. The Red Cross, this is Doctors Without Borders. There's a lot of people in need of medical attention at this very, very moment, and Doctors Without Borders is a great organization where doctors bravely volunteer to go into a war zone and help the people that don't have the means to escape and travel around the world to escape what is, turning to be more and more devastating of a war. And here's the Red Cross as well. Okay, so let's get this painting started here, and let's just maybe quickly talk about how we're gonna approach this. So I've got a couple of canvases that I've pre-gessoed. So typically what I do, I get these canvases I order them from Amazon. You can get similar ones at the dollar store for $1. These ones end up being about $2 off of Amazon. You can probably get a little bit more expensive ones at your art supply store. I think these work great. I do put a little bit of white gesso on there, even though they do come pre-gessoed. I do that because I just like getting a slightly smoother surface. So these have just been gessoed. I've got about 50 of them over here. I do them in a big assembly line kind of process to get ready for these episodes. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give this just a brief sanding with some 220 grit sandpaper just to take a little bit of the tooth off of here. So I'm going to mute the microphone for just a quick second. Okay, so now I've got two of these sanded. Now one thing you'll notice, let's say if I just take, you can kind of see a little bit of how there is some powder that comes off of here. So you ideally want to do this in a well-ventilated space, ideally outdoors. So usually what I do is I actually have a sander and I put a little bit, I take them outside and I do them all individually so that I'm not inhaling any of this powder. But just for the camera's sake here, I am sanding on camera. Okay. And don't forget, I want to talk about this book. This is a great book. This is probably one of the greatest books about art ever written. This book is all about what happened after Mark Rothko died. Fascinating story. But we'll get there eventually here, because let's stick with the plan. So usually, as I said, what I would do is use the template from the Dropbox and trace it out here. Because today's painting is what's called a color field painting, or abstract expressionism is the movement he was most associated with, although he did not consider his art to be abstract. And you're probably like, that's about the most abstract thing I've ever seen. Well, we'll talk about that in a moment here. I'm not going to do any drawing. I think I'm just going to start putting some color onto the canvas. So instead, I'm going to go to this step, which is usually where I put some warm yellow onto the surfaces and start to prepare them. And I thought I would just sort of mention that these are the colors that I'm about to use. This is the actual brand, and these are the colors. So when I talk about I'm going to be using a cool yellow or a cool blue, because those are really the two primary colors that we're going to be using here. Not in terms of primary colors, but those are the two main colors that I'm going to be using. Because we're going to be, this is called a split primary palette, means we have two of each primary color. This is what I'm using. But if you don't have that brand of paint, here's other brands that you could use. Golden paint, this is a higher quality than what I'm using. Part of my goal is to use the least expensive, highest quality paint that I can find, so you can see that you don't need to spend a lot of money to do everything that, you know, a professional artist might do. It is helpful to have better paint, just like it is better to have better flour when you're making bread, for instance. Liquitex also makes, this is their cheaper brand. Winsor & Newton is also a very well-known acrylic paint company. Artist Loft by Michael's Art Supplies. Buzz, Peebo, Holbein, and Daler-Rowney. Again, you can pause and go back to all of those if you want to look at them a little bit closer. So, you may also want to consider, if you're just sort of getting set up, having some small kind of cups and lids and bowls, because we're going to be making very thin coats of paint. Because essentially what Mark Rothko's whole process is staining the canvas with many, many layers of paint. So I'm going to get started. I'm just going to do what I typically do, is I'm going to put some of this warm yellow onto the canvas. And we're going to slowly build up this surface here. And I'm going to prepare both canvases initially the same, because I want to experiment with using some different materials inside these paints as we go. Why did I just put... I don't usually put matte medium in my paint. I'm not sure why. I usually put water in here at this stage, which I've done 203 times before this, and today maybe it's because it's a Saturday, not when I normally record. That's interesting. So let's just go with it. I'll just mix this up and we'll do something just a little bit different. Looks like I got a little dried piece of paint stuck in there. I am going to put a little bit of water in here anyway, just because it's going to speed the drying process up. So what that matte medium does that's different than water is matte medium is a binder. It's clear paint. It's just paint without any pigment. So it's basically the binder. It's like a glue that sticks all of the pigment together. Water, on the other hand, breaks the bonds between those pigments and turns this more into a stain. So this is just a little bit different than what I normally do. So but we're going to paint over all of this. Now we could be done here in about 10 minutes. If you really wanted to just power through, you could apply a color like this, and then you could let it dry, and you could put a little bit of blue on it, and then boom, you're done. So, you know, maybe even, in fact, well, no, I was going to say, maybe I'll do that, do the quick version. Yeah, maybe. Huh. I gotta think about that. Maybe I'll do a quick version and then complicate it. I don't know. I do think today is a perfect episode for you to do a little bit of experimenting and playing, because what we have here is just color, and it certainly allows you to really kind of dive deep into the material, which of course is exactly what Mark Rothko did, is just totally embrace color on its own and not worrying about drawing faces or landscapes and all that kind of stuff. It really changes the whole approach to painting. So this layer is a little bit thinner because there was less paint left on the canvas, on the palette. Paula wants to have 3 classes a week. Well, if there was a ton of donations, then I would have no choice. But probably my book publisher would not be happy. Although I will be probably doing a lot of episodes over the next little while, because I do want to. I've basically spent the past month doing a lot of research on Ukrainian artists, and it's interesting because I started doing that research back in November with the thought of doing this, focusing on Ukrainian artists probably in October and November of this year, and global circumstances have kind of maybe pushed that schedule up. Unfortunately. Okay. So now I've got these 2 with Imprimatura on them. And let's just take a quick second, just because maybe even worth numbering them or putting something on the back to distinguish them. So I wonder, I was going to, let me see, what if I do something like, should have done this first if I had the idea. Let's say we'll do A. And B. So now we can kind of have 2 distinct versions unfolding at the same time here. Okay. So the quickest method, if you just wanted to crank this painting out as quickly as possible, is you could let one of these dry and then paint, it looks like maybe a little bit of white and then some blue over top of it, because you see a little bit of this white halo, and then it won't look exactly like this, but it'll be, you know, it'll be done. You know, again, you could be done here in 10 minutes and you could just turn off and watch a previous episode if you want. But one of the things with Mark Rothko is there's more work than might first appear, and the pleasure of looking at a painting like this in person is that as you get up close to it, you start seeing more things coming out of the the paint surface. And the way that like, these are large paintings that if you were to stand in front of it and you can get up kind of close to it, basically is up to the rope or that is on the floor or at your waist in the museum, and you sort of look at it until the image disappears from your periphery or the edges, and then you're just sort of disappear. You sort of feel like you're falling into this undefined space. So, part of the subtlety of color and that nuance is what helps create that feeling of falling into outer space of some kind of way, right? So, okay. But I think what I want to do on one of these, I'm going to prep it. I'm actually going to put some white. I'm going to mix like a cream color to go over top of it. And maybe one of these I'll just leave alone. So we can also see the difference between one canvas that is worked maybe more than the other, and the nuance that we can build, and then one I'm just going to keep much more simple. Okay, so let's say A will be the one that because this looks like it's got a little bit more paint on here. This one is a little bit thinner, so I'm going to move A out of the way. And I think what I'll do, in fact, yeah, let's I'm going to do this, and I'll let this dry, and then we'll just talk about Mark Rothko's biography a bit. So I'll put a bit of this white there. I'm going to put some matte medium over top, and let's take this other palette, and I'm going to put some paint on here now. I'm going to start with my cool blue. And let's take some more red. So yeah, let's just take these colors. Basically what I'm going to do here is just kind of mix a little bit of a brown. So I'm just going to take a little bit of blue, a little bit more red. You can see not that much. And let's just stir this up. What I'm trying to do is just get a little bit of a canvas-like color. All right, so here's like a canvas bag. All right. So I'm just kind of mixing this color, which I'll apply over top. We could have done this first, but I always like just kind of starting with that warm yellow on its own. Okay. So I'm going to take this paint and I'm just going to cover this whole surface. Oh, you know what? I should have. I got to blow dry this first, even though I've just done that. That's interesting. I'm still going to blow dry it. We'll see if that appears later on by the very end. Will we notice any difference in this area? I'm just going to mute the audio. Okay. Now I'm just going to spread this all over this canvas. So it looks, so basically I'm trying to recreate the look of the canvas that he would have been painting on. As I said, we could have maybe just gone directly to this and not put that warm yellow on there. And it seems a little bit counterintuitive because the painting is eventually going to be yellow, and that's why I'm going to do two paintings today, so we can just see the difference. And I'm totally willing to, if we get to the end and they look the same, to be like, oh, well, that's interesting. Maybe we didn't need to do all that work. I'm quite confident that we're going to see the difference in these two paintings when we get to that stage, but if it doesn't happen, then that's, hey, that's a great lesson to learn, right? Okay. So it's a little bit patchy in the center, but that's okay. Some texture here. Rothko, at this stage in the mid-1950s, when he made this painting, did not really use much texture at all, because he's painting very thin. Interesting how that area seems to have been preserved. Okay. Okay. So, time for a sip of tea. And maybe it's worth now just talking about Rothko and these paintings, and we'll just put these side by side so they can dry. Actually, you know what, let's see, there's these little bits of canvas that were coming through. I just want to get that with a bit of paint. Okay. Because, you know, it sounds kind of nitpicky, but when you're making a painting like this, color is all you have. The surface is all there is, right? It's this idea of like this super flat kind of surface, which is, you know, why, you know, Rothko would have used a lot of turpentine and to thin the paint out consistently. And turpentine works a lot like water does for acrylic paint. Turpentine is what you use to clean your brushes from oil paint. So it's breaking down the bonds, and so that's he's basically staining the canvas over and over and over again. Okay. So let's take a look at Mark Rothko's story. And so Mark Rothko's born in 1903 in Latvia, or what is now known as Latvia. At that point, it was a country under Russian occupation, right? And dies in 1970 by his own hand, unfortunately. So there's a kind of a sad ending towards his life, which, as I said, only gets worse after he dies. There's quite a gigantic scandal that unfolds that is emblematic of some of the shifty things that go down in the art world. So, let's see. So he is born as Marcus Rothkowitz to a Jewish family in Latvia, and his father, I think, was a pharmacist. Yeah, and it was a big reading family. They were intellectuals. They were constantly reading literature and nonfiction books. And so it was like there was a lot of discussion and debate in the family. His father was a Marxist, and that features later on in Mark Rothko's life, where he gets really interested in workers' rights and some of the union movements when he moves to the United States. But this period of time, really all around the world, it's a terrible time to be a Jewish person, because there's a lot of like horrible racism towards Jewish people who have sort of been scapegoated for every single conceivable ill that might plague not just Russian society, but obviously in Germany this becomes a major issue, but in the United States and in Canada, all over the place, Jewish people are face like abhorrent racism. It's particularly strong in Russia, because Russia is going through some terrible economic issues. So there's constant violence towards Jewish people. And so that makes, I think he talks about his life was, as a child, was the constant anxiety that something would happen, that someone would throw a Molotov cocktail through the window of their house and burn it down. So compounded by that, then there's this political instability, which eventually explodes into the Russian Revolution. And of course, World War I is on its way. And Rothko's father, Jacob, decides to move the family out of Latvia to the United States to help escape the potential conscription of his sons into the military, into the Russian military. There's just like bad stuff is going on. We got to get out of town as quickly as possible. So they move to Portland, Oregon, and settle there. Although just a few months after they get there, Mark Rothko's father dies. So now the family has picked up and left. I don't even think that any of them spoke English by the time they moved to the United States. And the father's dead, the breadwinner. And again, this is 1913, I think, when they arrive. So this is this is still in a time where women aren't really allowed to work. So his mother has to sort of find kind of whatever work she can to help support the family. All of the children do some kind of work. So they end up working for Mark Rothko's uncle, who operates a warehouse. And through that kind of process, he's also seeing kind of the struggle of these workers to make ends meet. And that kind of feeds into some some of the political beliefs that his father had about unionizing workers, etc. And so he becomes kind of involved in the workers' rights movement. Let me see. So Rothko gets a scholarship to Yale University, and he goes there for 2 years and studying to go into, I think, law and engineering. But again, when he gets there, he finds that the campus life is just like this virulent anti-Semitism, and it's also a very elitist school. A lot of the students there are quite wealthy, and he's there on scholarship. So he just finds this like an intolerable place to be. And so he drops out of Yale, moves to New York City, and while he's in New York City, he stops in at the Art Students League, which is, I don't know how you would describe it. It's sort of like it's like an art school that is sort of like has like drop-in classes. So I can't even really think of like a model for that elsewhere. But you have like pretty good teachers that are teaching at the Art Students League, and he immediately is like, whoa, this is where I'm supposed to be. So he decides to go into trying to become an artist. He also studies at Parsons, the New School for Artistic Research, I think it was called at the time, or the New School of Design. I think that's the New School. That name is more recent. And he studies with some of the great artists like Eshel Gorky, who becomes kind of like a mentor to him, and Max Weber as well, particularly. And so he's finding all of these people that are quite inspiring around him, and he also meets some other artists like Barnett Newman, who we're going to be doing a couple Barnett Newman paintings soon. Eventually runs into Willem de Kooning and Jackson Pollock, and that's the circle of artists that eventually become known as the abstract expressionists. Another thing that he really falls in love with the art of Paul Klee. Remember I don't know where the Paul Klee painting I did is around here, but we did the I think I photographed it and filed it away already, but the Paul Klee cat with the bird on its head. That he becomes a major inspiration to the work of Mark Rothko. In fact, let's just kind of take a look at some of the art that is being made. So we could see this is he goes to school to Yale drops out in 1922, I think, and moves to New York in 1923. So these are all works that are kind of after that initial period or kind of after he's finished his schooling, and he becomes friends and under the influence of this other artist, Milton Avery, who is like a fairly prominent American painter of that period of time, whose paintings kind of resemble these. They're often kind of figurative landscape paintings, but very simple. A little bit like Klee, but maybe not quite as playful. And you can start seeing that influence. Now, also at this time, in the 30s, is surrealism is kind of spreading all over the world. And Cubism has already happened, but there's still lots of artists that are practicing Cubism. So we have kind of those influences are kind of feeding into his work. And some of these paintings, they look very strange and weird. They're also very similar to the paintings that Jackson Pollock did at this exact same time. And you could see some of the influence of Paul Klee in some of these paintings here. And then gradually you start seeing, like, let's say in the background of these paintings, these big flat areas of color, and using some of the staining techniques that he'll later become very famous for. And at some point he's just like, do I even need to be drawing these shapes on top of all of that stained background? So some of the line work starts to disappear, and now we get these sort of like splotches or stains that are happening that aren't contained by outer outlines, etc. Right? So they're just they become these amorphous kind of cloud shapes. And I think that immediately he's like, oh, I'm stumbled upon something that's new and different, and there's not really anybody else doing it. There's a lot of other people doing abstract painting, but a lot of it is more in this kind of line. And this is also a lot like what Gorky was doing. Another one of his teachers I mentioned there before was doing. If we go down, so then you start seeing kind of at the end of the 1940s, the beginning of 1950 is when he has his breakthrough. And today's painting was done in 1954, which is really at the height of this, of his breakthrough period, right? Where now, instead of lots of little kind of shapes and stains all over the canvas, we're now having just these large fields of color, right? Or color field, because there's a whole movement of art called color field painting that is sort of inspired by Mark Rothko's style. And almost every single one of these paintings that are on the screen now are large, 6 by 8 feet, 4 by 6 feet, human size, human scale. And that's really important because, again, it's the idea of that you can sort of get lost in this space. They're so big that you sort of encounter them with your body and not just with your eyes. Like, he talks about smaller paintings, of which the scale we're doing is pretty small, as being more tied to narrative art, to storytelling, figurative art, where it might be about someone you know, someone's face, but it's also telling us a story of who they are and maybe the power relationships in that culture or society. Mark Rothko wants to get rid of all of that. He wants to have a pure experience with color. And we've talked about this when we talked about Kandinsky and Sonia Delaunay and Paul Klee. A lot of those artists at the turn of the century, of the 20th century, were really starting to think about, like, what can color do beyond just trying to replicate reality? And I mentioned before that Mark Rothko doesn't see these paintings as abstract paintings. In fact, he thinks of paintings like, let's say, Claude Monet's painting as actually an abstraction, or as an abstract painting. And you're like, but this looks like a haystack in a field. That's certainly this is more realistic than any of these, right? Mark Rothko would say, no, this is an abstraction. This is not a haystack. That's not a sunset. That's not grass. This is paint. This is some blue paint, and we have some pink paint, and we got some green paint. This is just paint. It's not there's no relationship to reality here. This is all an illusion. It's trickery. It's fake. It's a lie, right? He says this is real, and it's more real than real because you fall into it. It's not trying to trick you or deceive you or tell you any story. This is, you're experiencing pure reality. Again, some people will agree with that. Some people will say that's ridiculous. That is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But that's what he devoted his life to. So I think it's worth taking it into consideration as, you know, the product of someone who's very, very serious about what they're doing. And you can agree or disagree, but I think it is a very compelling philosophical argument that we can have. Anyway, let's keep on scrolling through here. He does do a number of paintings that are similar to the one that we're about to do today. I don't know if any of them... Okay, here's one of them. You can also see that almost all of these paintings are just numbered, or they just have the names of the color. And he also stops doing interviews. He stops talking about the art. He stops explaining the art, because he says, every time I try to do that, those concepts get in people's minds and they interrupt the experience of the art. So I wanted to make it just as straightforward as possible. This is just number 6, number 4, or it's untitled, yellow and blue, like today's painting. So that there's no narrative ideas that are getting into your head while you're looking at it. I wonder... We just keep on scrolling down here. So in the mid-1960s, you know, he's starting to experience... He's become very famous, internationally renowned. Same thing with some of the other artists that he was friends with, Willem de Kooning, Jackson Pollock, Barnett Newman. They are now all been sort of canonized as the great artists of their time. This is also the explosion of American art. America, United States, and particularly New York, is now considered the center of the art world, which is a major shift away from Paris and Berlin and Moscow and London. Those were, at one point, the centers of the art world. The 1950s, 1960s, all of that shifts to New York, right? And a big part of it is artists like Mark Rothko who lead that. At the same time, Mark Rothko feels sort of like, yeah, I'm famous, but not for the right reason. No one really gets what I'm trying to do, and that leads to this like existential frustration where he's like, I don't know how one would explain it, but you know, it would be like maybe a musician becoming famous for the song that you know, first I was just watching something here on YouTube of the band Pearl Jam, which was like a grunge band from Seattle in the 1990s, and one of their early singles that the record company wanted to put out, they the lead singer of the band, Eddie Vedder, said, like, no, that's not going to be a single. This is a very personal song. I don't want this to be a commercialized thing that is playing under Pepsi commercials or something. I don't want it to become a famous song. It means too much to me personally. And so they fought tooth and nail to prevent that song from becoming a radio hit. Yet it still did become that, which was quite frustrating for Pearl Jam, right? And I think the same sort of thing, I'm just off the top of my head thinking about it, so I'm not sure if the analogy holds up, but it is interesting that Mark Rothko is becoming more and more depressed just as he's becoming more and more famous, because he doesn't feel like people are getting it the way what he's trying to do. This is one of his most famous projects that he works on towards the end of his life. I think from 64 to 68, he creates 14 paintings for what becomes known as the Rothko Chapel in Houston, Texas. And I think it's on the University of Texas campus. I've never been there myself. This is kind of on my bucket list of places to go. And it's this kind of round space that is lit from above, from natural light. And it's a non-denominational church, so there are actual religious ceremonies, Christian, Buddhist, Islamic, Catholic, Protestant. Anybody who wants to use the space is welcome to use the space. As well, they have concerts and poetry readings inside there. So it's a really cool space, but you can see it's surrounded by I think what they called like the dark paintings or the black paintings. And so it's a lot of people who've been there feel this sort of solemnity of being in this space surrounded by these big paintings that are kind of, that you just sort of feel like you fall into, because they're kind of black and purple in color. And there's lots of things like we're about to do here on them that you can't quite see, so you sort of feel like you're in a dark room kind of swimming through this murkiness. Kind of around, prior to this, there's also a big, I'm not sure, in fact, I just want to, let's see. There's a very famous incident in art history where Mark Rothko is commissioned by Seagram's to make a number of large paintings for the cafeteria in one of their main head offices in New York. And after making a number of the paintings, he realizes that he doesn't feel comfortable that these paintings that are inside this kind of multinational company and these very wealthy people are just sitting around eating and not really experiencing the art as he intended. So he buys the work back, he refunds all the money and he takes the paintings back, and now they've sort of been distributed a few different places, but the Tate Modern I think has the majority of them. But it is sort of a famous story of part of the Rothko legend of this guy who's like, yeah, I don't care how much money you're going to pay me. I have a way that I want my art to be displayed, and if you're not going to hang them in the way that I want, then I don't want any part of this exhibition. So that's a kind of a significant kind of turning point as well. That also feeds into this like, people, I'm trying to do something like revolutionary, no one gets it, which of course leads to his suicide in 1970. And I'll just kind of briefly mention, I don't know if it's mentioned on his, I'm sure there's probably something in on the Wikipedia page here. So I'm not going to cover, maybe we'll talk a little bit about this while we're painting, because it is really interesting, the scandals that unfold after he dies, where the family is sort of duped out of a lot of Mark Rothko's paintings. There's a number of galleries, I think it's Marlborough Galleries in London, England, that sort of does the worst damage. Is what they're doing is they're selling the paintings to collectors for, let's say, $10 million, but then they tell the family, oh, actually, this paint, it only sold for $20,000, and since you guys get 40%, we'll give you $10,000. When in reality, they should be giving them $5-6 million, right? So it is just like, and so there's just tons of lawsuits back and forth, and people saying, oh no, before he died, he promised the gallery all of these paintings, and the family's like, what are you talking about? Which is very similar to what happened to Bob Ross. We've talked about that, I think, when we talked about Bob Ross. I just wanted to share with you, just before we go on to the painting, I was just doing a little bit of research here, and I found some of these quotes fascinating. So a question here in Quora is like, is this painting we're making today was bought in 2015 for $46.5 million. And so people, the question is it worth buying that? I thought this person's super cynical take on this right here. Rothko's paintings are the ultimate expression of genius marketing. The art lies purely in the promotion. When you look at this, you're looking at the tangible evidence of the fragility of the human mind and its inherent need to fit seamlessly into the collective consciousness. It's so much more than mediocre paint on canvas. It's human weakness, decadence, jealousy, and anger. It's a social experiment. Who the hell would pay this money for this nonsense? While on the other hand, what plebe would miss the priceless beauty of this? It represents everything wrong with society, and that's what makes it intoxicating. So that's this idea that it's sort of this self-perpetuating lie that everyone's too afraid to call it out for the garbage that it actually is, and it sort of just keeps perpetuating itself, and no one wants to admit that they don't understand the joke because the joke's on everyone. It's all on us, right? And Mark Rothko is in his grave laughing at all of us, at how stupid we are to be duped by and to call this kind of painting art, right? Yeah, like people say it's like the emperor's new clothes, and people buying it just cynically, purely because they think the value is going to go up. So I just want to put that out there, because that is some of those things are probably some of the dominant reactions to art like this. So I think it's worth just making sure that we get that in there, because I'm sure there's probably a few of you looking at today's painting and thinking the same thing, like, really? $45 million for this piece of garbage? Pfft, my kid could do that. To which I always say, if your kid could make a painting like Mark Rothko, then you'd better get them some paint and some canvas as quickly as possible and start taking some photographs and get them out there, because that's a golden goose. Because as we're about to find out, it's maybe a little bit more complicated than it might seem. Okay, so after now having talked about his biography, let's think about the next step here. Traditionally, what we would do is do our underpainting. If there were some, let's say a portrait, we might start painting the face or whatever. Let's like some darker outlines so that if they get buried by paint, we can still see them. I don't think we're really going to do that. So I think what we're going to do, and these are still a little bit wet, I'm just going to blow dry them, and then we're going to start applying some paint on here. So I'm going to mute the microphone, and Okay. It looks like, I guess, hopefully everyone found the templates fine. I see some comments about that. I know it's a little bit confusing. One of these days, I've been thinking about reorganizing everything in the Dropbox folder, and then I'm like, then it's going to be even more confusing because people will see on the video something's folder 120, and they go there and it's actually folder something else, and it's just so like, you know what, let's just try to keep it so whatever people see on the screen is actually reflected on what's in the Dropbox. So Maria says, the all-time question, what makes a masterpiece a masterpiece? How much marketing is involved? How much is real work, meaning, etc.? Yeah, I mean, a great question. Great question. I do think at the end of the day, good artwork ultimately comes through. It ultimately is about good artwork. And despite what some people might say about these paintings, when you do see them, if you do give them a little bit of your time and try to approach them with an open mind, it can be kind of revelatory. You have to sort of humble yourself and kind of come into it knowing that maybe I don't know everything there is to know about everything, and maybe I just need to give it a chance. I've definitely had conflicted feelings about Mark Rothko over the years. There was a time in my life where, when I was much younger, where when I would look at this painting, I would have also thought this was horrible garbage and a joke. I remember actually I saw the Mark Rothko retrospective in New York at the Whitney Museum, and I sort of left. There was people like crying in front of these paintings. And I was like, is everyone crazy, or am I crazy? Because I don't get this at all. I certainly don't understand why people are crying while looking at a painting like this. That seemed insane to me. But over the years, the more and more I painted and played with paint, the more this started to make way more sense to me. And more I was like, oh, you know, there is some pretty interesting things going on here. And I could see how someone would arrive at a style of painting like this. And that's one of the reasons why I think when we're recreating these paintings by all these artists, it helps us to kind of, it's like we're literally walking in someone's shoes, or trying to, or at least in their footsteps. And it kind of builds a little bit of empathy and understanding. So, let's think about, so there's so many different ways that we could approach this painting. So for instance, you know, we see that there's many layers of paint on this canvas, and we could almost try a number of different colors in here and just see what results. So if we look up here, there's some sort of kind of brownish color going on. And there's some sort of, this now appears to be still yellow, but it's obviously there's something darker that was underneath here. And same thing. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix a kind of a brown, and I'm going to apply some of that brown very, very thin on this canvas. So let's mix. I'm going to put all my colors on this palette, and again, if I don't use those colors, one of the things that I do after every session is I've been putting my paint on this Jay DeFeo painting that we did, I don't know, back in November. Even like the little bits, you know, you saw me peel this paint off from the top of my tube. I'm just going to glue this here with the idea of just it getting bigger and bigger and more texture, just like her painting was. That gigantic painting, which is in the LA County Museum of Art's collection now. Do we want some white? Yeah, we're gonna need white, that's true. So I think that we may need more paint, but I think we're gonna be doing such thin layers that we probably will have some of this paint left over by the end. So, what I want to do, let's make a brown. So we're going to make a warm brown. I'm going to take some of my warm yellow, a little bit less warm red. Actually, that was a little bit more than I was, but actually, no, that's fine. Just a bit more yellow. And a little bit of warm blue. Maybe it's a bit much again. Okay. So, and then I'm going to use some matte medium here to thin this down and make it more transparent. In fact, ideally, maybe even making it more transparent. Maybe I should have just taken my brush and just put some matte medium there and mix this in. I'm just going to go with this. Maybe we'll start with a bit of a darker color to begin with. So I'm going to put these side by side. So what I'm going to start by doing is perhaps a little bit of this up top. Maybe up here. All right, it's kind of I want this to be thin. Just sort of dry brush it out a bit. Looks like actually maybe he comes down even a little bit here. Okay. So maybe I'm just going to switch over to here. And I'm just going to do a little bit of this. Running out, so I'm putting this a little bit thinner. Maybe let's put a bit of this right up top here. So this is my much simpler version. Okay. So now we got those two. I think what I'll do next is actually I'm going to clean this brush, just wipe it off, and then let's think about how we can get this color right here. Like, what color is that color? see if by looking at this painting closely, if we can see what's happening under there. That is really hard to distinguish. So it's not clear, but it might be this blue potentially. And there's also some other very, very light colors up in and around in this painting as well. So, I'm gonna go to my warm blue. And let's put some matte medium here. I'm gonna take, because this warm blue is really probably my darkest color in terms of value in this entire painting. So I'm going to take some of this paint, put it on my brush. And there's still some of that original color, my warm brown, which was warm blue, warm red, warm yellow, and matte medium. I didn't clean the brush with water because, you know, Mark Rothko was notoriously secretive. We really don't know how he did what he did. The only way that he never wrote about it, he never gave interviews, he never let people into his studio while he was painting. So the only way that we sort of understand about what he was doing is through x-rays and testing of the pigments. So we got to sort of be like detectives while we do this painting. So I'm thinking maybe there's something underneath here. And it's also kind of darker underneath this area here, so I don't know if all of this is here or not, but this gives me an opportunity to kind of build up this surface a bit. So he often did these kinds of shapes too, these kind of, I can't remember, he called them, I think, like portals and things, like they're openings into some other space. Maybe I'll just... Maybe I'll do just a little bit of this here. I'll just keep it. Maybe I need a little bit more. Let me mix a little bit more blue into this. This is my fast version. So I'll just put this here. In fact, I'm going to blow dry both of these because ideally what we would do is let these paints dry before we start layering over. I've been kind of a little bit fast about how I'm approaching these, so maybe it's time just to slow down, Michael. I'm going to mute the microphone a little bit. Okay. So, let's go back here. I think I want to just add a little bit more of this blue because it was not quite as dark as I would have hoped. Okay, so how about we'll just continue to kind of experiment and play with some color. So what if we took some of our magenta, and maybe we'll take our magenta and mix it into here. And I'm not saying this is what he did, because again, we don't know what he did. I'm just trying to think, how could I get some sort of similar effects in this painting, knowing a little bit of what I know based on glazing and applying paint. So, I'm just going to mute this. Okay. So it does seem like it gets a little bit darker over on this side. Okay. I'm sure there's people tuning in who are like, that is crazy. What I have, that's weird. I don't know why he's doing what he's doing. But that's exactly why Mark Rothko didn't let people into his studio, because he was just like, people are going to lose their minds. They're going to be like, why? It looks so awful and so ugly. And he's just like, I'm just... stay out of the studio. When it's done, I'll bring it out and we can take a look then. Okay. So I'm going to blow dry this real quick. Okay, so next what we're going to do is we're going to apply some white on here with a little bit of matte medium. So I'll put my matte medium. It's always a little tricky using white and matte medium together because they both look white. Even though this will dry clear, my matte medium, my white obviously won't. So I'm going to start by just mixing a little bit of white into this matte medium. So let's see how dark this color actually is. In fact, let's just give that an extra second to dry. And again, let's take a look. Here, we can see there's little bits of white up here. So it looks like he actually painted some of this white at some point down here. And then here, rather than going right to the edges, I'm just gonna get rid of that white that snuck out of here. Oops. Okay, I'll leave that. Let's do the same thing onto this one. I just need to make a little bit more of my white. Take some more of this white, mix it into here. Maybe I'll keep that like this. We'll do something that maybe a little bit different in there. Okay. So let's just take a look at how these two paintings are developing. All right, this one remember we painted this kind of cream color over the yellow Imprimatura. This one's just the yellow Imprimatura, and we just immediately started painting directly onto it. There's a little bit more details in here, whereas this one, again, we're just trying to keep this maybe about as simple as possible. Okay. Carlito says, not gonna lie, but the brushstroke sounds like Bob Ross's brush. That's great. I'm a Bob Ross fan. Absolutely. Bob Ross. I probably wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for an artist like Bob Ross, right? Regardless of how you might feel about the quality of the artwork or the subject matter of the artwork, I think he is is absolutely credited with helping to sort of democratize art and make art accessible and fun to people that don't have the opportunity to go to art school, right? So I take that as a compliment, absolutely, 100%. So I'm gonna blow dry this. Okay. So, what should we do next? Maybe... you know what? It might be worth just doing a little bit of a double check here on the colors that he's actually using, and seeing if we can just use some of the tools that I've included here in the description below for color checking and finding the accuracy of some colors. So there's a couple of links to websites down in the description below. Where are we? 139. So let's upload this painting. And let's just see what this color is. So it's interesting, when we look at this color, this is what it's telling us. This is a pretty warm color. And we'll see here exactly what I mean. When I put this color in there, I think one might assume that that yellow is a very cool yellow, which is maybe a little bit closer to the Ukrainian flag, is a bit cooler. Versus what we see here is a little bit more orangey, right? So this tells us here, you know, if a color is moving this way, it's getting warmer. If a color is moving this way, it's getting cooler, right? Because it's getting going towards the green. Warm goes towards the orange, right, and red. So where were we again? Now we're up here. You could see that it's even got a little bit of a brown quality, right? So if this was a cooler yellow, we'd be kind of right here. A much warmer yellow basically is orange. So that's interesting. Let's even just do the blue here, just so, I mean, we can just check around here. Some people are like, well, you just got happen to get a very orangey thing here. You can see all of these, if we look down here, they're all like very orangey colors, right? This sort of looks like our warm yellow, more of a mustardy yellow with, in fact, even more of a warm brown, right? A yellowish brown, warm yellow brown, right? And then in here, that's got some of that brown quality. Anyway, our blue, this tells us this is definitely a cool blue, but I'm just making sure we're kind of, in the same vicinity here. Let's take that, copy, and paste it. And again, definitely a cool blue, right? Because all of this area is a cool blue. If it was a warm blue, we'd be over here. Right, here's your ultramarine blue is in this area. Your cobalt blues in this area, your cyan, cerulean blues are right here, which is sort of where we are, right? And you don't have to go too much further before we get into teal. So let's just see that again, right? So it's also a muted color. It's got a little bit of some of the darker values, some maybe red in that color as well. So while this might seem like a very bright painting, when we actually take a look at the colors in it, it's fairly muted, right? The reason why it seems to be so bright is some of the things that Rothko is using. It's interesting, Matisse would concur, is that, you know, we have a yellow right next to a blue, and they're not opposite when we're on the color wheel, but in terms of value, they're about as different as possible. In fact, if I was to go to my tools here, it's worth just quickly checking here. We can do something such as saturation here. If we just take the saturation down, we can see how different these are, right? This is exactly what we generally encourage you to do as an artist, is have strong value contrast. So we've got a much lighter value here and a much darker value. So there's strong oppositions. Even though the saturation of the color is kind of muted, it's still, like, for instance, if we wanted to pump up the saturation, we could go much higher, right? But that's like twice the saturation. Anyway, just a little kind of detour there. I just thought might be worth kind of thinking about. Okay, what do I want to do next? Let's maybe I will use a little bit of cool yellow for part of the underpainting of this here. Let me get them side by side. Okay. So I think, what if we took a bit of like the cool yellow? What if we put a bit of cool yellow, let's say, underneath here? Just take it right. Actually, let's put a bit of matte medium in here just to thin it out a little bit. Because we want to keep. Rothko used almost exclusively thin coats of paint. Very infrequently would he ever paint, at least at this stage of his career, something that is much, you know, with a kind of just paint. I almost never painted straight out of the tube, I guess is what I'm getting at. So what if we took this color and we just paint over this here? What if we do something similar here? And then what if we do this inside? Oops. Okay. And then let's I would do the same thing right in the middle here. This is going to be my simple painting. I'm just really experimenting and playing with color. So You certainly don't have to follow what I'm doing here if you don't want to. I think it's just kind of fun to see what results. I'm going to paint this same yellow. Let's do it all over this top. I'll do it just on the top and we'll leave the bottom just as it is. I wonder if there's anything I can do while these dry. Any of those other areas. But let's just take a look again at them side by side. This is after that cool yellow. Yeah, this is maybe I'll just do a little bit more. One of the things that I notice when I'm painting with matte medium is this little bit of a stutter kind of quality. I often notice that happens when I'm using matte medium and I'm brushing quickly. It seems to kind of like the brush skips over the surface and makes kind of like this almost like ripple effect. It doesn't bother me. It's something I notice. To avoid that is just going a little bit slower. I do tend to get impatient and want to paint quickly, but it is what it is. Let's see now. I'm going to blow dry this, and then I think I'm going to start going into my warm yellow and start applying that over here. I might have to do 2 or 3 layers of that and maybe even add a little bit of white. So we'll blow dry this just to kind of make sure all that yellow's dry so that I'm not actually scraping that paint away with the next layer of paint. Okay, so let's go to our warm yellow now, and we'll put some matte medium in here just again to thin it out. Maybe not quite as much as I've done with some of the previous ones, so I'll just put this, mix it in. So it's going to be a little bit more opaque than some of the previous layers. But still thinner, more transparent than it would be if I just took this paint right out of the tube. In fact, no, I think this is okay. I was going to say maybe I should thin it out even more, but this version was going to be my fastest version, the kind of just get it done as quickly as possible version. So I think having it being a little bit thicker makes sense, right? So I'm going to paint. want to kind of feather that edge out as much as possible, which could include potentially even using a mop brush just to get those feathered edges. Even do a little bit up here. I want to leave a little bit of white because he did as well. I'm going to let that dry, and I'm going to do maybe a couple more layers right over top of that blue. It's still quite distinct. This one will do the same thing. I'm just going to need to put more matte medium and more warm yellow on the palette. Paula just asked which one is A or B. A was the one where it was sort of is maybe my faster version of the painting, where I'm just applying. I just started painting directly on top of my warm yellow Imprimatura, whereas the B is the one that I'm painting right here is the one where I'm just taking a little bit more time to add a little bit more finesse, a little bit more details underneath, and to see if we can notice a difference. Okay, let's just try to keep on flashing back and forth so we can see them side by side, how they're developing. All right, we'll blow dry this here in a second, but you know, I think on camera some of the work that I've done in here with those under layers is kind of obscure. It's not coming across quite as distinct and bright, or it's not as visible on camera, but in person I just see these slight little effects under there, which is exactly what I want, right? It's the subtlety, the nuance that makes a Rothko painting. So you might feel like, wow, it's just, I can barely see it. Exactly, that's the point. You can barely see it, but it's there. It's sort of, your eyes are picking it up. Your brain is just sort of like, I'm not sure, is it really important that I notice that? But it's the kind of thing that if you were to sit with a painting like this for an hour, which people do, like if they sit in the Rothko chapel, they're like, it's just a big bunch of black paintings. I can't believe I paid to get into this garbage. They sit there and they're like, wait a second. I see some greens, I see pink, I see purples, I see orange. Whoa, there's more going on in this painting than I realized. There you go. So, I'm going to blow dry this, and I'm going to do maybe even another coat of this paint. It's almost a little bit too dark, so I might lighten it up. I might even put a little bit of the cool yellow into the paint, because now I'm kind of, as we get more and more layers of paint, that surface becomes more and more opaque, right? And it's harder for light to penetrate all the way down to the white of the canvas or the yellow of the canvas and bounce back to our eye, right? So as it does that, it's sort of like losing energy, and the color is getting darker and darker. So I'm going to mute this. Okay, so as mentioned, I'm going to let's take a bit of this cool yellow. So what this is going to do is sort of just bridge the gap and pull this warm yellow a little bit closer to the cool yellow. And I'm sure some people are like, but you just said this is actually like almost a brown. Yes, and that's what I've got here, but now it's actually becoming maybe a little bit too brown. So I want to go the other way, but rather than adding white into the paint, which is going to tint it and lighten it up, I want to see if I can use another color that has a lighter value, which is our cool yellow, right? Is lighter in terms of value between the warm yellow, right? So if I put some, maybe I'll put a good healthy scoop of this in here. And then let's just see if we start painting with it. Let's see, how do I want to do? Let's do a first. Again, I don't know. Maybe this is not going to turn out the way I want, or maybe it's going to be exactly what the doctor ordered. One never knows until the paint gets on the canvas. You can sit and try to outsmart the painting. It's not until you actually get your paintbrush wet and start applying paint that you can start to see results. So actually that's working really well. I like that, how this is the effect it's having. Because we still have that deep, darker color. It's just kind of brightened up a little bit without white. Because if we added white in here, white tints the color, it lowers the saturation and becomes more pastel, right? And I like pastel. Pastels are beautiful. But if we don't want pastel, then we have to figure other ways to get the effect we want, right? And as I do this, I'm slowly kind of getting rid of some of the darker areas of this painting. All of this paint, as it builds up on the canvas, is also smoothing the canvas out. Now, obviously, when Rothko's painting, he's using oil paints, and he's painting even thinner than I'm painting. And he's doing this over the course of months and months, right? Because it takes quite a while for oil paint to dry. So he's working on many paintings simultaneously. As one dries, he just shifts his focus and moves on to a different one. Another thing, if I take my yellow and I bring it actually a little bit over top of the white, it actually is going to make that color look a little bit darker. So when I put my blue over top of those areas, over top of this yellow, it's going to be much darker. It's going to look a lot more like some of these darker areas in here. Right, so in fact, I can even put maybe a little bit of, oops, if I want to bring some of that back out, I can do a bit of that there. Okay. Wow, these are starting to become like really deep paintings. There's a lot in here. And again, if you were to have talked to me when I was 22 years old, I would have just been like, I can't believe these, what a charlatan to show people how to do this. This is ridiculous. And then as I get older and the more that I appreciate the nuance of paint and color, I go like, it's really interesting what's going on here. It becomes more like a science experiment of seeing how light is working in my brain, how my eyes work. But it also makes you think about, like, you can understand why Rothko would get quite depressed about, you know, his standing in the art world and sort of being constantly laughed at and ridiculed, and people thinking thinking that he's a charlatan, right? Maybe I just would do a little bit more of this up here. Just try to fade that edge out just a little bit. Okay, let's see these side by side again. Interesting. I would say in person, these look very close to what we see on camera. Now they look a little bit more cool yellow, but definitely they look almost orange. So I don't know what's going on with my my setup. I might have to play around with my color correction on those cameras, but I'm pretty confident I'm working in the right direction. I do want this stripe that I added here is still a little bit intense, so I'm gonna go and do this again, and try to just darken this, but I want to blow dry it first, otherwise I'm just going to take the paint right off, and so will drive me nuts. So I just take my time, Michael. Okay. Oh, did I put this? Let's continue. I'm going to take more of this cool yellow and put that in these areas. Interesting. I'm kind of scraping some paint away down there. Okay, I'm just going to, again, blow dry that real quickly. Okay, so let's just see kind of how these are developing. I think I'm just going to do one last coat with some of the warm yellow and just finish this area. It still looks, to me, a little, looks like I got my fingernail painted. Looks a little bit too dark. It looks okay on camera, but to me it's just way too prominent. So I want to get rid of those, and then we're going to finish up with our blue on the bottom here. So let's just see about this. That's much better. And that's much better. As they dry, those colors come back up. So you know what? I'm gonna leave it like this because maybe I'm misjudging things at the moment. Maybe once I get this blue in here, I'll be like, oh, what was I thinking? Putting all those coats of yellow over that blue stripe. I should have done the blue. So let's do that now because I'm sort of trying to think maybe too far ahead, too many steps ahead. You know, I'm like a chess player trying to outsmart the computer. Be like, you know what? A computer has no idea what I'm about to do. The computer's like, I can think about 4 million steps ahead of you. Don't try it. Okay. So we looked at the color. We looked up this color, and this was a cooler blue. So the question is, can we just take that cool blue and apply it right here? I'm going to put some matte medium in here again to thin this cool blue out. And we'll do a number of thinner coats to start. Because we don't want to go too far. We can kind of take our time and build this color up in terms of opacity. And that also looks very pop, you know, like a popsicle stick. So that's a little bit too intense for me. So what I want to do is I'm going to take actually a bit of red from across the color wheel, my warm red, and mix this. Did I go too far? No, that's okay. I think that's might have gone a bit too far. Let's take a bit more of a cool blue back in. That's better. So we still got a little bit of the punch of that cool blue, but we've muted it a little bit. We've pulled it just, you know, maybe 15% closer towards the neutral core. So it's just not going to be quite as intense. If we want to make it more intense, then we can put this layer down, and then just, because this can be kind of transparent, we can go back and brighten it up afterwards. So let's start here and see what we get. Okay. I just realized a little smudge in the bottom corner here. Okay, that's fine for that first pass there. I don't mind that. I think that's okay. You know, it's a little bit patchy as I applied it, but I'm not surprised. Let's do this one here. I think I want to get more of this on and just do it a little bit faster because it was kind of drying. I was getting some streaks in there. And maybe the next time we'll go the opposite direction. Okay. So let's just see these, and then we're going to blow dry that. It's coming along. So, you know, if we, yeah, let's blow dry these. Sorry, I was muted the whole time. So let's just keep on. I'll just actually mute myself and then. Okay, I'm going to put more of this matte medium. Actually, I might just blow dry that again real quick. I see a few places aren't dry. Got a little splatter of blue right in the middle. Oops, and up top there. If you're quick on the ball, you can take care of those little things. So let's move this out of the way. So I'm just going in the opposite direction rather than up north-south. I'm going left to right in order to contradict what had seemed to be kind of this dominant kind of texture that I was starting to really develop. I may even need to do that again. So let's let that sit. Okay, these are coming. They're coming along pretty good. That's good. This is good. And I kind of, I do think that some of that area, remember I was saying, is a little bit too dark. It's still maybe a bit too dark, especially over here, but it's less visible, less apparent, less of a problem. Shoot. Just got rubbed my fingers. Just gotta let it dry. Ideally, I should just let that dry and pick it off afterwards, but I'm too impatient. Okay, Lolly asks a great question. Michael, can I ask why it is you choose to use the thinner layers rather than one or two thicker ones? Is it a texture thing by layering the color? Great question, right? So it's actually not a text, like, I guess if you think of texture in terms of tactile texture, I want as little of that as possible. So we want it to be as kind of flat as humanly possible. It's like, I guess the example might be if you're like making croissants, right? Why does a master croissant maker take, flatten out the dough and then put some butter and then flatten that and then put some butter and flatten that and have like 50 layers of thin dough with butter in between, rather than just taking one layer, put some butter, big chunk of butter, and then just put it in the oven, right? It's because it's that combination of all of those things which creates that super flaky kind of pastry, right? Same sort of thing here in a painting, building up lots of super thin layers that have like, let me see, I can see if I can draw this out. Oops. So if we think of like the side of a canvas like this, right? One way to think about doing this would be to take a layer of, let's say, we could just put yellow here and blue here, right? The light's gonna go bounce through here, and let's say this is your gesso, or there's maybe other layers, right? So it's hitting, this is like wood or canvas, right? In the way that Mark Rothko is doing this, he's doing like tons of layers here. And so the light is sort of going, kind of comes through here. And, if we've got maybe a red layer, a blue layer, yellow layer, a gray layer, yellow layer, blue, yellow, like, then the resulting color that comes back to our eyes is incredibly complex. We're seeing a whole bunch of colors simultaneously, not mixed in together, but simultaneously. Again, kind of like that croissant dough. When you bite into it, it has a different flavor and texture than it would be if you were biting into pizza dough, which is sort of just one thick thing, right? Yeah, I mean, it is kind of like, it's hard to kind of quite wrap your head around it, but the result, you can see the results if you ever get a chance to see any of these paintings in person, and you give it a little bit of time. Again, if you just walk into the room and go like, look at it, it looks like a black painting, then yeah, you're not going to experience much. But it's the same sort of thing if you just walked into a movie and you just sort of walked in like, yeah, doesn't look good, I'm out. And people are like, but you were there for 10 seconds. What? Like, how did you, like, yeah, I just got a feeling I didn't like it. It wasn't my kind of movie. Okay, well, I mean, you hear that with like people say, we got to ban a book, and they're like, oh, what was so bad? I don't know, I haven't read it, but I just get a feeling. The cover on the back description is just not my thing. I'm like, okay, well, what if you read it? Do you think maybe, so you have to, you just have to see these in person. I remember I had a teacher, an abstract painter as a teacher, and he would always talk about his paintings were impossible to photograph. And I remember always like, yeah, because they look like garbage in person. We didn't get along, but there is something kind of to that because the camera flattens everything, right? It can't see as in the way that our eyes see. At the very least, our eyes, we see with binocular vision. With two eyes, a camera sees with one eye. It looks at things like a cyclops, right? And it just flattens everything down into like numbers on a computer screen, versus our eyes can see all of the complex stuff and our brain processes it. And but I mean, that's a lot of paintings are like that, not just abstract paintings, but abstract artists decided this is like what they're really going to focus on, is the experience of seeing color. And there's other artists who've gone beyond this and use just light, who instead of actually painting on canvas, one of the most famous, Olof Eliasson, who I think he's Swedish, has done these huge installations. One was probably the most famous version of it was at the Tate Modern in London, where he sort of created this, it sort of looked like an artificial sun in the middle of the gallery. They have this huge space they call the turbine hall, because it used to be like a big industrial manufacturing plant that they turned into an art gallery, and they have this huge hall in the center, and he built this device that is kind of circular and just emanates a super bright light, and it's so bright that everything kind of looks monochrome. All of the colors, everything just looks yellow and gray. You can't see any color, which is totally so you're standing there next to your friend, and your friend looks like they're in black and white with a yellow filter on them. Like, it's the weirdest thing. It's so weird. Like, and you're not wearing glasses or 3D things. So there are artists who sort of took what Mark Rothko was exploring, and other artists, like we go back to what we were talking about with Kandinsky, and we're going to be talking about another artist, Kazimir Malevich, probably one of the most famous Ukrainian artists upcoming soon, who are all very interested in all of these ideas of quote-unquote liberating color from, the role that it's been forced to play for so long. Let's see, I've been just sort of painting more and more layers, but am I doing what I want to be doing is the question. Now, this is still quite light. As it dries, it's going to get darker and darker. I do worry that I may have put too many thicker layers. Maybe I should have been thinner. And so now this is actually getting darker and darker, and as opposed to kind of the lighter color that I ultimately want. And I'm now kind of losing. Remember, I did some lines and things into there. I might have lost a little bit of that. So, as I've been talking about using thin layers like this, here I've been starting to use more and more thicker layers. So go figure. I do exactly what I'm trying to avoid doing, but let's blow. Actually, you know what? Before I blow dry them, again, it's so strange how that. You can see when I cut my hands on it, it looks much darker. It is bizarre to me that these seem to have like disappeared, at least on camera. I don't know how that looks in person, but that's a really weird thing that's happening there. But also very cool, because it's like that's color in action. Take a little bit more of that cool yellow. Let's see, I don't have any medium in here. We'll see if this is a bridge too far. Not bad. It's doing what I want it to be doing. The matte, there's no matte medium in it, so it's really, it's much more opaque, so it is taking a bit of a chance here. Okay, I feel that's better. Much better. It looks like on camera like those things have disappeared, but it's one of those things that we want people to look at it and it's sort of something emerges from that yellow area. I feel these blues are getting better as they dry. They're becoming a little bit more transparent, so my anxiety about that is sort of dissipating. Okay, let's look at these. I'm feeling pretty good about them. Like they're accomplishing what I wanted to do up until this point. As I blow dried this, some little areas are starting to come back through. So that's perfect. You know, and this is still a little bit wet, so we'll just let that dry. So just before, I'm maybe happy with my B one here, because remember B was the one where I put a little bit more work into some of those foundational layers. So on camera, probably they look identical. There's probably very little difference that you might be able to see. In fact, let's look back at these. On camera, they're sort of doing what I want them to, although this, I think I want to paint that. Let's get a bit more paint here. It looks a little bit too white. Let's just see if that helps a little bit. But there's just little nuances in this one that complicate the painting in just very, very subtle ways. Now, whether most people will notice those ways or not is a whole other question. Whether people are going to stop and look at this one to see those nuances, or whether, you know, if we put these side by side and ask people to vote on which one, I bet you a lot of people might just say, I don't know, flip a coin. They both look exactly the same to me. But I'd say in person, at least this area up here is, I like that more. Inside the blues, because I put so many layers on there and I was a little bit heavy-handed with the pigment and they weren't quite as thin, I'm not seeing as much difference, at least, and they're still wet. They could change, but I'm not seeing as much difference as I would have liked. Okay, so what I want to do now, just to kind of, before I wrap up, is do something a little bit different and a little bit fun and a little bit crazy, is to try using a little bit of egg in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use something else what I want to do is I want to extract the egg whites from these eggs. Now this usually works better with fresh eggs. The older the egg, the more likely we're going to get a little bit of the membrane from the yolk in here. So I wasn't able to get fresh eggs. I don't know how old these are. We've had them in the fridge for about a week, so we can still eat them and cook with them, but they're like a week old. So let's see. Never used a palette knife to crack an egg before. So let's see. Let's make sure. Maybe let's go to... Good, okay, maybe that's actually a lot more egg white than I was expecting would come out of this. Okay, that's some of the membrane. So that's more than enough that we're going to need anyway. So I'll put this aside. By the way, like, using eggs might seem kind of like we're really losing our minds here, is like basically the oldest approach. In fact, I'm just going to wash my hands because I don't want to get like salmonella and stuff on my tools. So just give me 1 second here. Okay, so now I'm going to take some of my blue. I should just keep the egg carton out here so people know that we're doing something kind of nutty with eggs. Okay, so now let's mix this up. So this is, we're using one of the most traditional approaches to making painting, is to mix eggs and pigment together. Now we're using acrylics because I do have powdered pigment, but since this is an acrylic painting class, we'll just actually use acrylic. What this is we're doing here is basically using the egg white as a glazing medium here. And you know what, I should probably have done this in a cup so I could really stir it up and froth it up. I'm going to use my big brush that I've been using throughout today's painting. I'm just going to clean it off and get some of the mediums that were on there. Well, he says I switched to a cooking show. People are like, what? Okay, what are we cooking today? We are gonna cook up a Rothko today. Now this is maybe a very high concentration of paint, or so let's take some of a little bit more pigment and put this in here. Okay. You guys are cracking me up. Okay, so this might seem totally bizarre to do this kind of thing, and in today's world it does seem bizarre, but this is mixing pigment into egg is how tempera paint was made, right? Most of the paintings from the pre-Renaissance medieval paintings use this exact same process. And there are artists today who make egg tempera paint. If you're making your own paint, this was really the primary way that artists made their own paint for, I don't know, like 1,000 years, until around the early 1500s, where artists started using oil, linseed oil, instead. So what this is going to do is give us like a very thin glaze, and it'll also take a little bit of time to dry too. It will also act a bit like a paint retarder, or slow the paint from drying. And we know that Rothko did this exact thing in his paintings as well. Not all the time, but he's known to have done it, because when they tested some of the pigments, they noticed there was egg protein in there. They're like, what? And it's like, he was really experimenting with his materials to try to get the look and the effect that he wanted. Dirty rag to clean up. So I also just want to let this dry. Probably don't want to use my hair dryer, otherwise, like Lolly says, I'm going to have an omelet on my canvas. We want to just let this take its time, and which could take, you know, maybe 10-15 minutes for this to actually dry. There is those streaks in there, so I'm just going to see if I can get rid of some of that. There's maybe a bit too much. I think that's good. I think it'll be very interesting to see how this ultimately dries. So it'll probably take a little bit of time for that to happen. I've also got a lot more left over that I could use, although I can't think of any other applications for it. So, but let's take a look. You know, I am tempted to do a little bit of that on here too, because but I'm like, you know what? I think it'll be neat to see them side by side, and we'll have to compare on our next episode and just see how this ultimately played out. Now, you would want to, you know, leave this to dry in an area where it's not too hot or too cold, right? If it's too cold, it'll dry very, very slowly, and probably bacteria will get in there and mold will form. If it's too hot, it'll dry maybe too quickly. We may even start seeing some cracking. So in like a warm, just like a room temperature would be ideal for that. Okay, so I think it's time to do a little side-by-side comparison and wrap up for the evening. So which one should we start out with? Let's do A first. And maybe I should have something in behind here to block out. Let's see. Bit more here. Okay. So, you know, now that I see this, maybe my blue could have gone up a little bit higher. So if I was using my template, I probably would have seen that and made this a little bit larger in relationship to the top, because it's almost half and half. But I mean, that's kind of a minor quibble there, right? In terms of like the surface, I feel pretty happy with the way it turned out. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more complexity up in this area, which I see in my second painting, my B version. But I'm also very intrigued to see how my egg yolk is going to turn out here. So let's move this one off to the side. This one. This is B. Okay. And again, you know, I see a little bit more complexity down in here. I also see a lot more complexity happening up in here, which I like. I mean, that's kind of such a trademark Rothko kind of thing. One thing that this is almost a little bit matte. I almost feel like it's not quite as I am tempted even at this moment to add a little bit of gloss medium into my blue on this. You know what? So let's do that. I almost never do this, but especially towards the end of Rothko's career, he did start playing with matte and gloss Okay. So here's some gloss medium, right? As opposed to my matte medium. I'm going to put that on this, in this blue area here, and just see if we can get this. I think if that blue has a little bit more, has a bit of a shinier quality, I think I'll like it a little bit more. So let's just move this guy out of the way. Here I was about to wrap up and say goodbye, and then I look at them and see, because what I'm seeing here with the one where I use the egg yolk is that it's the reflective quality that it has now. Now I'm expecting it to dry matte and to be not reflective, but at the moment its reflective quality is kind of hypnotic, and I'm like, wow, I want that on this painting too. What can I do to get that? Let's use some gloss medium. So since I've got egg white in there, I'm just going to use a different brush. I'm going to mix my gloss medium and my cool blue together. I'm using a smaller, I could have used a bigger brush. Should I use a bigger brush? Let's see. I mean, I could even just brush matte medium right over, or sorry, gloss medium without even any pigment here. That could also work. Now with this, I do really want to make sure I don't have any big ridges, because those big ridges will catch the light even more than the matte medium will be, because it's reflective. It's a reflective paint, right? So we want to try to keep that down to a minimum of, if possible. Let's see how that unfolds. Okay, so let's just check that out. Definitely, it's not quite as rectangular, but I don't mind it like that either. As in fact, now that I look at his, this is one of the most squared, cornered of all of his paintings. A lot of them are much more like what I've painted. So maybe I've just become, I've absorbed Mark Rothko into my system here. Let's do one last observation of them side by side. We've got A over here and B here. Yeah, now I can see it's starting to dry and it's not as shiny. So this one will be shiny. It'll look like this one did, which I think I will appreciate. But you never know. You never know. Okay. So we're going to start wrapping up here, folks. I do want to just remind you to like and subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and if you want to leave a small donation, there's links below to the PayPal or my website if you want to contact me through that those channels. As well, since this painting resembles the Ukrainian flag, and that's been making its rounds through social media, If you want to make a donation to support the people of Ukraine, I'm a Ukrainian person myself. I would be everyone in that part of the world would be grateful for your support. So you can donate to help the refugees through the UNHCR, the Human Council for Refugees, I think, or something. I can't remember the acronym. The Ukrainian Canadian Foundation, they help support when refugees come to Canada, as well as to giving people shelter who are refugees, as well as through UNICEF taking care of all the children caught in the crossfire, Doctors Without Borders, all of the doctors who are so bravely going into the battle zone and helping the families that just don't have any option to leave, as well as the Red Cross, right? And there's Red Crosses in Canada, the United States, England, etc. So lots of great ways that you can support. Okay, so thank you everyone for once again watching, painting along with me. I would be so interested to know if you used an egg white in today's painting. Even if you didn't do the Ukrainian flag, maybe you created your own egg tempera and made a painting, right? It's about the least toxic kind of paint you can make. So, with that having been said, thank you everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening and your weekend. We'll see you guys on Tuesday. We're going to do a whole week, 2 paintings on a Tuesday and Thursday dedicated to Nicole Eisenman, probably I think the greatest contemporary artist, like painter alive today. An incredible artist, and I'm really excited to tackle her paintings. We're gonna have some fun on Tuesday. We're gonna kind of get a little goopy. We're gonna use mediums for if you're a beginner artist. That might be the first time we've done that. So thank you everyone. We'll see you guys in a couple of days. Good night. We'll talk to you all again very, very soon.